Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup. I'm your humble host, D-Bays. That's talent on loan from Kolob. Every week, we ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. So thanks so much for joining us to discuss the contemporary events in Mormonism. This is February 11th, 2024, and this is episode 106 coming right at you. Mr. Beast has gone Mormon, and you're not going to believe what he's up to. There's an incredibly viral LDS Ex-mormon debate on Jubilee, which we're going to do some reactions to. And finally, the Mormon News Roundup has been featured on the Religion News Service. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm at www.mormonnewsroundup.org, or you can send me an email to kolob@mormonnewsroundup.org. I'd like to welcome onto my program my fabulous co-host, Bill Reel. Bill, how's it going?
How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing just fine. Bishop Reel, can I call you Bill, or is that okay?
Once a bishop, always a bishop. So even though I've been excommunicated. So
who are you and what are you all about?
I am the founder and executive director of Mormon Discussion Inc. We run Mormon Discussion Podcast, was the first podcast that started, but we also are the umbrella for Radio Free Mormon, Almost Awakened, Rami Umptum Ruminations, Mormon Sunday School, and others. So we have an umbrella podcast. There's maybe 7 or so that are currently running. I get up every day and work from home trying to put out content with our incredible co-host in some programs and host of their own podcast and others.
And what is your 60-second Mormon story, Bill Reel?
I am a convert to Mormonism at the age of 17 because my girlfriend and now wife flirted to convert. I joined the church in 1996, was a bishop at age 29. At age 32, I had a faith crisis over the history of the church and then over the social issues in terms of the church marginalizing people. I started a podcast about halfway through my time of being a bishop, and eventually they excommunicated me around 2018 for calling Elder Holland a liar in spite of the fact that I shared 5 instances with credible evidence that I believe he did.
Well, I will be very careful about what I say about Elder Holland based upon that information.
Okay.
Let's jump right into the news this week. And we got a follow-up from last week here, Bill, which is that sex abuse case, which we reported on last week. And it was President Hintze in Pennsylvania was charged for not reporting child sex abuse, and he's facing 1 count. And we have some leaked audio here of President Johnson talking about the now released President Hintze, and that has really gone viral here. So let's hear what the announcement is to the ward following the charge of President Hintze not reporting child sex abuse.
Brothers and sisters, many of you are aware that the state police this past week charged President Hintze with the failure to report information about an abuse situation that was given to him when he was acting as clergy as a state president. And there's been a lot of information that's been out on the internet and causing questions. The articles fail to mention, based on the research and the position the church has, that President Hintze in this particular situation did not have discretion, or was not permitted to report that particular information. This particular situation occurred over 20 years ago. The victims of the abuse are 30 years old. They've asked us to read a statement. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day-Saints works actively to prevent abuse. Our hearts ache for victims of abuse, and the church is committed to addressing such incidents wherever they are found. The church trains its leaders and supports their lawful efforts. The charges now brought by local prosecutors for failing to report the abuse are misguided, and the church will vigorously defend him. The situation is much more complicated legally than the information you're reading on the internet would lead you to believe. One thing I can tell you is that Elder Cook, member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, has been actively monitoring and watching what is going on. President Haney, who is the president of the area where we live, General early 70, has also thoroughly reviewed the situation. He's talked with all the lawyers involved. And the counsel we've been given is that we move forward, we continue to have our meetings, continue to work, and that all of this will be resolved appropriately, and that it's in Heavenly Father's hands, and that we're to have confidence in our church leaders and understand that everything that President Hintze did was fully approved by the church. He followed appropriate legal protocols, and that he's done everything that he was supposed to have done.
What I get from this is that President Johnson, who was just speaking about President Hinckley, who did not report the child sex abuse when it came to his attention, that he followed corporate legal protocols. And that's very helpful for LDS leaders. But what about the victims?
It seems strange to me that you've got a stake president who seemingly, with the church's legal help, according to the charges filed, broke the law. You've got victims of sexual abuse, not in this case, but in others too, where the church often tries to keep it under wraps and doesn't really want to talk about it. But in this instance, they have no problem coming to the stand and telling you about the innocence of the stake president. I'm sort of caught off guard by what the church likes to kind of like, hey, let's not talk about this. Let's just keep this on the down low. Let's sign agreements not to talk about it. In what instances the church has no problem standing up in front of a congregation and claiming that the stake president's innocent in the middle of the fact that charges were filed. I don't think the church seems to preference victims. It seems to really preference, based on its 1-800 number that you call, it seems to preference the protection of the church. And I hope, just like Elder Kieran, who was called as an apostle recently, I hope that the church does more for the victims of sexual abuse within the church.
One thing I noticed about that statement is that there's not the slightest shred of compassion for the survivors in this statement. They didn't say, we sent licensed therapists, we've made these inroads, we provided these resources that are available, we've ensured that they are now in safe locations. I know it was quite some time ago when this abuse happened, but it wasn't victim-centered. It was always about the perpetrator here. And that's what real contrast as to what has happened to the people who were abused. Well, they're apparently not important, but we did make sure in the statement to emphasize that the area president and Elder Cook are fully aware of the situation and have been briefed. And my question is, why haven't the area president and Elder Cook, instead of being briefed on it, why haven't they met with the survivors? Where is the outreach to the survivors here instead of trying to cover the church's legal missteps?
Yeah, the church has always said that it's the gold standard in terms of abuse, but I think you and I could sit here for 15 minutes and lay out 10 or 12 measures that would make them much better at handling it. And I think often the main trouble that gets in the way is that the church's priority is to protect the good name of the church, which often involves the church handling things in ways that doesn't prioritize victims.
The church is claiming that there was some confusion in the mandated reporting law in Pennsylvania, which is quite strict as a result of the Sandusky sexual abuse scandal back in 2014. But what we have here in this particular police report statement that has since been released to the public here, it says that at the time of the disclosure, meaning the time that President Hintze found out about this sexual abuse, Hintze would have been acting as a religious leader in his position as the Harrisburg Stake President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and therefore would have been a mandated reporter as defined by Title 23, Section 6311. However, he failed to report the abuse to authorities. And this really just gets me thinking that when you have confusion, when you don't know what the law is, this is why we have law enforcement. You make an appointment with your local law enforcement and say, it seems like I have been told here that I have credible knowledge of that an abuse has happened. Am I required to report? And that would have saved the stake president. Instead of relying upon Kurt McConkie advice, you can contact law enforcement and they will tell you whether you're a mandated reporter or not. It just seems pretty simple to me about what the stake president should have done.
But it really isn't his fault, right? Like, he calls the number and he has to trust, because this is the way it works in the church. I served as a bishop. I was given the number to call. Nobody trained me on what the laws of Ohio were. If I had ever used that number, I was going to be responsible to trust the voice on the other line. And that sounds like what this stake president did, was he trusted the folks on the other end of that phone call to the church's legal representation. He followed their advice. And it sounds like now it may be bad advice that he took.
Now, one of my favorite YouTubers and TikTokers out there is Julia from Analyzing Mormonism, and she had a very great take about this. Was President Hintze a mandated reporter or not? Let's play this and get your reaction to it. I do have an agreement from Julia to come on the Mormon News Roundup soon. I don't want to let all my cats out of the bag, but let's see what she has uncovered about being a mandated reporter in Pennsylvania.
Yes, so let me go over the case of Corey Gooden and Stake President Hintze, who failed to report the abuse to authorities. In 1997 and 2000, at least 2 children were abused of the ages of 8 and 12. Now in 2024, so 27 and 24 years later, these children are now grown and of course are no longer children. As represented in the police report, one of the victims and Bishop Corey Gooden reported the abuse to President Hintze. The question is now being asked, if these victims are over the age of 18, is President Hintze still a mandated reporter? I emailed the Pennsylvania Family Support Alliance and they informed me that it is a mandated reporter's responsibility to report when they suspect that a child is a victim of abuse. When the individual turns 18, they are no longer a child. Therefore, a report is not required, but it is encouraged, especially if the alleged perpetrator continues to have access to children. And as a man who is serving in leadership callings in the church, and perhaps even continuing to be in the ward at all, Corey Gooden would certainly still have access to children. So my question, with that legal aspect in mind concerning mandated reporters, why was President Hintze arrested? Did something in what was confessed by Corey Gooden, or the victim, give cause for the Pennsylvania State Police to arrest President Hintze? And if this is all just a case of President Hintze no longer being qualified as a mandated reporter in this instance, because the victims are no longer children, why didn't the church just say that instead of hinting at it? I have questions.
So it is a very complicated case, Bill. Can I give you the last word on what we've learned from President Hintze in this entire situation?
It just seems strange what the church chooses to say in these cases and what it chooses to not talk about. And it seems obvious to me that once again, the church seems to prioritize the protection of its good name in the middle of bad things happening rather than putting the victim's well-being in their own health as a priority.
Thanks for your thoughts on that. Now, you can find the Mormon News Roundup. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're also on YouTube. If you can leave us your thoughts on this one, we'd appreciate it. Now, this next article, Bill, is another really unusual one here. Mr. Beast has teamed up with the Mormon Church. I just couldn't believe it when I read that. Now, I know I'm a little bit older here, Bill, but my kids are a big Mr. Beast fan. And, you know, he has something like 100 million subscribers. Just one of his videos has had more views than every single one of my videos combined. He's an absolute juggernaut out there, and he's known for his philanthropy. And it's called Mr. Beast Philanthropy. And Just Serve, which is the church's app for volunteering, have announced a partnership in a joint Instagram post here. What do you think about the LDS Church teaming up with Mr. Beast on the Just Serve app? This is really unusual.
So first off, I'm quite familiar with Mr. Beast. I've got kids who watch his videos as well, and I've actually looked to some of the things he does to help me raise the quality of our thumbnails, for instance, and some of the production value of what we do. Huge YouTuber. I'll tell you this too. I looked up the Just Serve website, and I'm actually quite impressed. I'm seen as a critic of Mormonism, of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but at the same time, when they do good things, I want to speak to it. So I can't really find a bad angle here. When I looked at the Just Serve website, the church really isn't getting a lot of notoriety. If you were to go on there and look, you don't really see the church highlighted. There are tons of opportunities in the local area. I typed in my zip code here in Southern Utah, and there were probably 100 different opportunities to serve. And I actually looked at one that I think I'm going to reach out to and see if I can help out with. I think this is a great chance for the church to do some good in the world without it looking like there's some sort of catch of them getting something from it. And for that, I applaud them.
Yeah, it seems like people with deep pockets are uniting together because Mr. Beast, I think he's the most well-compensated YouTuber around. I want to say that he makes hundreds of millions of dollars a year. His net worth is extraordinary, and the church obviously has extremely deep pockets as well, which was also just uncovered here once again by our friends over at the Widow's Mite Report, who tweeted this out, LDS Church Finances 2023 edition. So it's taken them some time to really compile what the church has been doing in 2023. And the basic basic summary here is that the church has a total wealth, according to the Widow's Mite report. Of course, this is unofficial, but it's probably our best shot at understanding what the church is up to with its finances, since the church is not at all transparent, and that the church has a total wealth of around $265 billion, and the church is bringing in $31 billion each and every single year. And the use of income in 2023, this is the summary here, is approximately 17% of that is for church operations, 3% is for helping the poor and the needy, and a whopping 80% of that is used for investments. What are your initial thoughts here on what the Widow's Mite report summary says about church finances in 2023?
This looks like church business as usual. When you show those numbers, the $265 billion is not being touched. That's going to continue to grow. And of that $31 billion, again, 80% of that is going into the 265 to continue to grow the investments of the church. 17% used to help the church function day to day, and a measly, 3% to do humanitarian aid. The church has a lot of money, and it's not really doing much good with it. It's just storing it away for a rainy day. So one would have to imagine what that rainy day would look like, since they didn't tap into it during the 2008 housing crisis either.
And they did not tap into it during the COVID pandemic, which was one of the most egregious financial collapses in recent memory. What it said is that the church is up $265 billion, and that's just year over year. So in the last just year alone, the church grew in its assets of $30 billion, and it's bringing that money in from approximately $7 billion in tithing, approximately $10 billion from its investments, and then its commercial ventures, its farms, its ranches, its hospitality, and all of the other commercial ventures. The church is just bringing in a huge amount of wealth. And according to the Widow's Mite report, I want to just highlight a couple of slides here, like slide number 8. This shows you the humanitarian aid that the church is engaged in year over year, starting from 2000 up until 2023. And you can see that member welfare, that's fast offering, is a very, very small piece of the pie, just very, very small. Funding the BYUs is approximately $1 billion per year, and that has stayed somewhat constant. Church operations, on the other hand, have fallen over time, and that is probably due to what is called the Mormon shrinkage. And finally, we have investments. And investments, Bill, they continue to rise. The uses of church income from all sources, we continue to see it being more and more diverted into investments, especially into the Dow Jones, into the stock market, and into foreign investments.
You look at every one of those things, and the things you would, as a member who's unaware of this, what you would be guessing is that those got bigger and bigger. The only thing that got bigger was the investment part, the welfare, the church administration. All of those other categories got smaller and smaller, which means the church is actually spending less money on good things and doing good in the world and operating and functioning, and more, as you put it, into the stock market and into buying up land all over the country, as folks have probably seen in recent weeks.
Yeah, in fact, Nemo did a recent podcast episode on trying to track all of the church's investments in the real estate world in the last 2 years. And the church is spending at least $1 billion on real estate investments every year, and it's probably much, much more. A couple other slides to highlight here is the opportunity for the LDS Church to further increase its humanitarian work is massive. I do hope that partnering with Mr. Beast can get them into the philanthropic mindset, but this slide talks about resource allocation, estimated the uses of income for the last 5 years. For every $1 of income allocated to global humanitarian aid, you're going to see $122 that's going to go towards investments, either real estate portfolio or the stock market or other ventures. And only $7 of that is going to go towards a member welfare that is fast offering. So the ratio here is quite striking, is that 100-to-1 ratio. It's not that, 50% of your money is going into the stock market, or part of your donations are, being parked into investment funds. It's that the vast majority of all donations are going into the investment fund. And I had Jenna Reese on the podcast last week, and she talked about when the revelations came out in 2018 from the whistleblower from David Nielsen, that she really lost confidence in the church and does not pay tithing to the church anymore, because she realizes that so much of her money is not going to alleviate the human suffering on this planet, but instead is being parked in funds that are not being used now and may never be used.
There's a famous line in the original Star Trek series where Captain Kirk asks, "What does God need with a starship?" And my question, even in all the scenarios, as I think through maybe the second coming, and all the other kinds of things that could happen on this planet, what does God need with $265 billion and growing?
And let me just share one slide with you. This is just a summary. We link to all of these articles in our show notes here. And this is really the final takeaway slide. And it's the LDS Church's wealth outlook. And this is the best numbers that we have and the most updated. Again, the Mormon News Roundup, we only cover articles that are covered basically in the last week. And if there are no significant use of ensign peak investments, we estimate that the church will be worth approximately $500 billion in only 10 years' time and $1 trillion by about 2045. And you're looking at the wealth outlook of the church, and it kind of depends on how the stock market does and, you know, how its foreign investments do and a couple of other factors. So there's a couple of different trajectories. But even by conservative estimates, the church will be $1 trillion organization by 2049. And if it does well in its investments, it could happen and become $1 trillion organization in the early 2040s. The church is just an incredible juggernaut, which really reminds me of, does Mr. Beast, does he understand who he's partnering with? Because Mr. Beast is really about philanthropy. He gives away so much of his wealth. It's really inspiring and incredible what he does. And he does a lot. And I just wondered, does he understand that the church is on a trajectory to really hoard $1 trillion, whereas he is on a trajectory to give away so much? It's kind of interesting that those two organizations are partnered together. What's your last thoughts on this Widow's Mite report here, Bill?
While you wonder if Mr. Beast understands how much money the church is hoarding away, I often wonder if the believing members who go to the chapel and the ward building once a month or once every other month to clean the bathrooms know how much the church has in its possession.
That's a very interesting question. I think a lot of them do, but it'd be surprising. I'd love to see a survey on that, but I don't have the answer to that. A couple of other things that caught my attention here, Bill, this week that I want to get your reaction to is, there's more church growth in Africa than there is in any other place in the church. It's really the only place that the church is substantially growing. And I follow this individual on Twitter because he has a lot of interesting tweets about the church in Africa. And it's from Okpanachi Elva Sunday. And he has shared a couple of photos here, Bill, about, the incredible growth that the church has in Africa. And you see in these pictures for those podcast listeners out there, a lot of handsome folks out there, children, families getting baptized together, maybe 20 or 30 African saints getting baptized by mostly African missionaries. There's not a lot of white folks who go to these African countries and are missionaries. They try to service the African missions in-house. And it kind of got me thinking, Bill, why don't we see a lot of pictures like this in the church news? Because I don't recall seeing pictures like this. And one would imagine that the church would want to celebrate what's happening in Africa, but you never get pictures like this from the church news.
It is strange, isn't it, that the church doesn't want to celebrate that. But, I think you and I have both heard numerous statements or comments come out of the church over the last couple of decades where missionaries that have come back home report that mission presidents have been urged to not send those missionaries into the poor neighborhoods, but really they're looking to baptize the wealthy and influential. And hence, I sort of wonder if they really don't want to celebrate the growth in countries that have a higher degree of poverty and really are looking for tithe payers at the end of the day.
That's a very interesting theory. Let me ask you this question as well. What percentage of these folks in this picture do you think are going to be active in 6 months? What percent do you think are going to be active after a year?
Certainly going to be less than it is in the United States. And here we've got about 30 to 35% as an activity rate. I've got to imagine in a country like Africa that you end up with something in the range of probably less than 10 to maybe tops 15%.
That seems pretty reasonable. And also, what percentage of these folks in these pictures do you think were taught about the church's race and temple priesthood ban, which was maintained for almost 130 years? Do you think that they had full consent when they were taught the missionary discussions?
I can assure you that not only were they not taught about the 1978 revelation and the priesthood ban that came before it, but they probably weren't taught any of the messy history. It's probably much more of a watered down Christian church sort of philosophy being given to them. And I don't know that for sure, but I do know that the church alters its manuals significantly depending on what country they are in.
Yeah, I do remember being a missionary in the Washington, D.C. area at the advent of the internet. And I can tell you that once people gained access to the internet and CES style materials, that the church's growth significantly decreased. And what we probably see in these pictures is folks who, a lot of them don't have access to the latest CES letter type materials or any podcasts or anything like that. And, as these African countries, as the saints there develop and more people gain access to the internet, how long do you think that the church will continue to have growth there as Africa becomes a more developed country?
It has to be really difficult for a culture that are people of color, and they look over here and they see all white leadership essentially. There's also such a distance, right? The prophet is on the other side of the ocean, and he doesn't look like you, he doesn't talk like you. I have to imagine maintaining folks and continued growth has to be difficult. The growth itself is fine, like that's one thing, but it really doesn't matter much if you don't keep those, as they say, butts in the seats. And I think that's going to be just difficult to maintain no matter what angle you look at it.
You know, the most amazing thing is I had Coach from the Cultural Hall on the podcast about a month ago, and he follows the Mormon Twitter sphere, I think about as well as anyone, or the X sphere, if you will. And he was following Okpanji Elvis Sunday, and he said, hey, guys, remember a couple of weeks ago when that Mormon Twitter was praising this guy left and right? Well, it turns out that he's kind of a jerk because he noticed the tweet here from this individual that says, I'm just letting you know if you disrespect me, I will disrespect everything and everyone you hold special. So please be warned. So it's amazing when folks like Word Radio or these individuals get into the public sphere, the moment that they encounter the slightest bit of criticism, their true colors seem to come out. And we're going to be reviewing those Jubilee clips coming up here, Bill. And it seems like that's a pattern that we've seen time and time again.
It looks like if you're Desnat, you might want to consider reaching out to him to oversee your sect of Desnat over there across the ocean as well.
That's a very scary thought indeed. But this isn't the only race issue that I found this week. We keep the things coming fast and furious around here. And this was released here from the Salt Lake Tribune. And it said, bigots beware, repent racists, or you could lose your temple, recommend leaders warn. General Authority 70 Christopher Gerard Carrier, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, recently delivered a warning to Latter-day Saint racists. And it says, you will lose your temple, recommend. And he said, racism is a violation of the first two great commandments. If your racism is sufficiently serious, it may cause you not to be able to have a temple recommend. And I find that to be very remarkable, Bill, considering the church's history with the race and the priesthood ban.
How can you give church discipline to members who show attitudes of racism, but you can have prophets, seers, and revelators who talk to God, who are perfectly worthy and should be looked up to as being the spokesman of God's words from his mouth to their ears in the midst of admitting that they were racist?
The incongruity there is very stunning. And of course, the church has not really dealt much with its racist past history, which kind of reminds me when Jonathan Streeter put out that fake apology. Why it went viral so much is because the members, in my opinion, the ones I've encountered, want the church to talk about its racist past history. And it wants people in Africa, like those pictures that we see, to have full disclosure and understand what it is that they're getting involved with and what the church's troubling history has been with race. We bring you everything here in the Mormon News Roundup. This is a Washington Post article that I saw, and it says that nearly 30% of the United States adults now identify as having no religious affiliation. And it's gone from, just in the past 50 years, it's gone from 5% to 30%. So it's growing at a rate of almost 0.5% per year. And this is the makeup, Bill, of who are the religious nuns. And you have atheists are 17%, agnostics 20%, and nothing in particular is 63%. And that was a little surprising because I didn't think that the nothing in particular of the nuns would be quite so high.
I think people are deeply disappointed in religion. And as we live in an internet age, right, some folks are going down the rabbit hole of investigating the historical Jesus or the truth claims of their faith, or they see sort of the kinds of abuse that are occurring in various churches like the Catholic Church, and they just don't see an alignment of their values with their faith values, so they step away. But there's folks that stop believing entirely, and there's also a large segment of folks who, from that graph, seem to still believe in something bigger than themselves, but don't see religion as the best place to sort that out and seek that out.
And that kind of reminds me that those were the people I believe that you were targeting with the Almost Awakened podcast, if I'm not mistaken.
It is. We were offering folks a podcast that delved into sort of woke culture, but I think the healthier aspects of it, learning things like consent, looking into various ideas that might be different than yours just to see what has merit and what doesn't, pointing people to folks like Richard Rohr or Alan Watts. Jack Kornfield's another great one. and really not talking about Mormonism at all, but giving people sort of a second half of life resource to help them grow and to develop into the kind of human beings they want to be.
Well, perhaps I can correct myself because I said almost awakened in the past tense. You're still doing the almost awakened, but maybe just not as regularly as before, right?
Yeah, we haven't done an episode maybe in a month or two tops. We anticipate picking that back up here soon.
And the final slide on this from this particular article is the percent of nuns who say they believe in God or a higher power. It's surprising to me, Bill, that the nuns who don't religiously affiliate with anything, 70% of them believe in God or a higher power. 63% said that there is something spiritual beyond the natural world, and 36% believe in heaven. I guess I'm kind of a skeptic, or I don't know what you call me, but those numbers were a little surprising how high they were.
It is high, but it doesn't surprise me. I sort of get that there are a lot of people who are stepping away from their churches but they still believe in something bigger. And I think what it points to is that people have become disenfranchised and disappointed in the values of the religion they're leaving. They've become disappointed in the sort of behaviors that those religions are carrying out. Things like in the LDS Church with the SEC investigation. I have to imagine when you see your church leaders having less integrity than you start to sense that maybe your religion doesn't have anything to offer you.
Yeah, the Almost Awakened podcast is a great place for those with no religious affiliation who want to rebuild spirituality, especially after leaving the high demand religions. So I've listened to so many episodes of it and really appreciate your efforts. Hope that you will continue with that podcast for sure, Bill.
Thank you.
Now, a couple of other articles that caught my attention here is the church is being slapped with a string of new so-called copycat tithing lawsuits. Now, faith lawyers point to these class action cases as reasons that the appellate court needs to revisit its ruling in James Huntsman's fraud lawsuits, warning that religious freedoms are at risk. We did cover this last week a little bit, but we're starting to see these really crop up here. It used to be that, people would try to sue for their tithing and then they would lose every single time. We've seen a number of those cases, everything from the Tom Phillips case to the, I believe, the Gaddy case and a couple of others. But we're starting to see these copycat lawsuits, and they're copying James Huntsman's lawsuit with the church's statements surrounding the building of the City Creek Mall, which President Hinckley and Bishop Budge in particular said would not be built with tithing funds, but instead would be used with invested reserves. And because James Huntsman's appeal has been partially upheld, people are now rushing to sue the church, Bill, and copycat lawsuing and just basically following the path that James Huntsman trod for us.
When the church admitted that it carried out that SEC scandal, what it actually did behind the scenes to withhold transparency of the money it had invested in the stock market, it self-admitted that it did so that folks wouldn't decrease their tithing. And so they kept it out of view so that people wouldn't see how much money the church had invested. Hence, they wouldn't go like, well, they've got plenty, I'm going to stop paying tithing. When the church did that, it sort of opened up the gate that is now allowing, I think, room for these lawsuits to actually get through. And my awareness is that in the midst of there being, I think, 3, 4, 5 of them at this point, I know the church is working to consolidate those. It's trying to make an agreement in the legal system to bunch all of these lawsuits together, but they want to bunch them under the one that is not a class action, which tells me that the church is maybe even a little scared of this actually occurring as a class action lawsuit.
Yes, the church is definitely very fearful of James Huntsman and of these copycat lawsuits. And we got this from the article in particular that this was just filed just a few days ago on January 22nd, 2024. A letter to the Ninth Circuit Court clerk, Molly Dwyer. The Ninth Circuit is where James Huntsman has found a minor victory against the church. Well, the church's lawyer, Paul Clement, said that continued class action assaults against the church and other religions are inevitable, as long as the decision to resurrect Huntsman's personal fraud lawsuit remains on the books. And this is the most important part of this article. The church's lawyer continues, quote, while Huntsman dismissed those prognostications as catastrophizing, Clement wrote, the copycat suits filed in 4 months and the looming prospect of consolidation make clear that the threat is real. The church is really reeling on James Huntsman and these copycat lawsuits. They know that there's a giant threat out there, and they are fearful, and for good reason.
My hope is that they don't work to consolidate this, that the folks on the side of the actual lawsuits themselves, that they don't agree to place this under the one lawsuit that is not a class action, but rather I think you ought to do the thing the church is trying to avoid, which is to allow everybody to jump on board and say, you know, if I had known the church had had all this money and had known that they had used it in the ways that they did, bailing out Beneficial Life, building City Creek Mall, as you pointed out, these may have some legs to them, and I guess time will tell.
I look at the Ex-mormon Reddit from time to time. I don't look at it every day, but it usually has some interesting content out there. And what's amazing to me, and I tested this out myself, Bill, is if you Google Jehovah's Witnesses, or if you Google, I want to learn about Jehovah's Witnesses, the first sponsored link that comes up is for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it says, embrace Jesus in your life. Jesus knows and loves each of us personally, and we can know him too. And I actually tested this out with a couple of different religions, Bill, including Jehovah's Witnesses. And if you Google any of these religions, the church has bought the first sponsored hit on Google and a couple of other search engines, so that you'll be taken to the church first. And I find that to be extremely remarkable.
When you are the wealthiest of all the high demand fundamentalist religions, you get to ensure that you show up at the top of the charts above each of them.
It's nice to have deep pockets because you get to run the show.
Amen.
Being, as we covered earlier, having $265 billion in the coffers makes it easy to run AdSense campaigns for sure. The most viral thing I think that happened this week, Bill, and this is probably going to get us demonetized, but that's okay, is were you following here the Jubilee, which is this big channel over there on YouTube? It's got 9 million subscribers. It's absolutely huge. It's incredible. And they basically stage these quasi debates or discussions talking about, provoking understanding and creating human connection. And for the first time, they sponsored one between Mormons and ex-Mormons, and it's called Middle Ground. Can they see eye to eye?
I shared it on my Facebook page. I watched the whole thing myself, watched parts of it twice. I found it quite entertaining. The questions that are asked are great, and the answers that are given are quite telling.
Now, we're going to review a couple of these. We're going to keep the video size small. We're probably going to get demonetized, but that's okay. The Mormon News Roundup isn't about money. These clips are absolutely insane. So let me bring a couple of them to you, Bill, and get your reaction to them.
Leukemia. My illness will kill me 20 years earlier than Timber. You don't think that I wouldn't trade a little bit of Timber's gayness for 20 years extra? It's a trial, and it sucks.
To say that being gay is a trial is disgusting.
You don't
That
think
is like
dying
saying-
early is disgusting to
No.
me?
I am definitely happier now being married to a woman, having kids, than I was with my boyfriends.
If I look at Mormon culture expansively, I don't see people that are controlled.
The idea that Mormonism is a cult is a pejorative trope. If you apply any of these cult definitions, Apple is a cult. Wait until the next Star Wars movie comes out. It's a cult.
I'll admit the Mormon church does a lot of good for a lot of people. But if you just add up the amount of harm, that's when it goes from just a silly trope to a very serious conversation.
If we hold every organization to a standard that implies they can't have any sort of cultural stains that the entire country has struggled with, well, good luck. Does that evil make us uniquely evil?
I really enjoyed watching it. What I perceived was that on some level, the folks who are defending the church are having to be a little bit deceptive. It didn't show up in that particular clip, but there's one point, all of the folks on the church's side are asked if they can name the Relief Society general president, and none of them could. And Cardin says, well, I couldn't even name the first presidency. And I'm just telling you that that's not true. Cardin Ellis could name the first presidency. And comparing leukemia to being gay, I mean, it sort of is a lack of awareness on Cardin's part, and it sort of comes across as he really has some significant blind spots. I would really highly suggest that folks watch that. It takes about an hour. I think it was 59 minutes long or so. I think you'll really appreciate sort of the ability of critics to handle good conversations with believers while also pointing out the flaws on the other side's argument.
Yeah, and you had Cardin Ellis on one, and Kwaku also on one side, the Midnight Mormons, and then you had Jillian Orr of BYU fame and also John DeLynn on the ex-Mormon side, and it really seemed to have gone viral. Because, it's pretty easy to criticize Cardin Ellis on some of his cringeworthy responses, and what's amazing is that we don't get there's no general authorities, there's no apostles, there's no area presidents, there's no stake presidents. We can't find anybody on the Mormon side who's even willing to go into these spheres, and it's because, as we've seen on this Jubilee discussion, they usually end up on the short end of the stick. Let me just play the second one here, this next clip here for you, which talks about whether women and men are equal in the church.
Women and men are equal in the church. Agreeers, please step forward. Jeez.
I mean, we do believe currently that we are co-equal partners already, just different responsibilities.
I wholeheartedly believe that men and women in the church are equal. We have a relief society. We're one of the only faiths that's mainstream or large enough to have national recognition that I know of that has a doctrine of heavenly mother. I'm very aware that some people say, oh, because women can't have the priesthood, that you're a second-class citizen. But in the codified faith, women enjoy, sometimes we'll complain about almost preferential treatment.
Bill, it's almost preferential treatment, the way that women are treated in the church.
Hilarious. But you can show a picture of the church's leadership, and you get the first presidency at the top, and then you get the Quorum of the 12, and then the 70s. And then at the very, very bottom, the last row is women. And we try to tell the world, no, we have women leaders too. And it's just not true. Elder Ballard told women to put some lipstick on and not talk too much. There's so many instances in Mormonism where it becomes crystal clear that this is a sexist patriarchy. And listening to these gentlemen answer the question is just more of the same.
Timber here says that men preside in the church, but that doesn't mean that they're over women, or does it?
Okay, and the scriptures say that the one who presides in the household is the man, but presiding doesn't mean is higher than, okay, or has more power over.
So Julia is showing a picture of to preside literally means to have authority over or be higher than.
It's not there anymore, but just a few years ago, if a woman went to the temple to be endowed, her husband promised to be obedient to God, and she had to promise to be obedient to her husband, and yet you're going to say that one's not higher than the other. That's ridiculous.
Okay, we also have another one coming up here, which is where they talked about whether when the prophet speaks, the debate is over, which was a kind of a famous Mormon saying. And Nemo took a crack at this one as well. Let's get your reaction to this.
You should just not think about it. And that's not right. I think that is cultish. But that is not what the church has taught over time.
Roll the tape.
When the prophet speaks, sisters, the debate is over.
N. Eldon Tanner echoed her sentiments in the August 1979 Ensign, and it's not just a throwback to the 70s. Here it is at a BYU devotional from 2011.
My dear wife Ann introduced a motto for our family, which she has continually taught our children and occasionally has had to remind me that when the prophet speaks, the debate is over.
It's also an attitude that students are encouraged to adopt in the Presidents of the Church Institute manual. And it was brought up as recently as 2023 as the motto by which Elder and Sister Suarez live their lives. So yeah, I'd say that is what the church has taught over time, wouldn't you?
So, Bill, it seems like the Mormons in this want to walk away from a lot of the church's teachings of saying, well, you know, we're not cultish because we don't just have blind obedience to a prophet, or we're not a harmful religion because we treat men and women equally. But then when you hold their feet to the fire and go back and look at the record, it seems to be in total contradiction.
Can I add one more to that? The first counselor in the first presidency, Elder Dallin H. Oaks, said this.
It's wrong to criticize leaders of the church, even if the criticism is true.
So if your leaders make a mistake, if they do something harmful, they're malicious, you can't criticize them, even if the criticism is true. Of course, this is a church of blind obedience. You can put enough frosting on it, but it's still not going to be a very good cupcake.
Now, there's a couple of other debate questions that were up there, and one of them is the question of whether masturbation is sinful. And again, all of these have gone viral. It's just amazing how much traction these get. When you have 10 million subscribers, your videos really get a lot of eyeballs here. And we're going to see John Dehlin and Cardin Ellis, who are not exactly bosom buddies, sitting right next to each other and having a tense interaction.
Yes, masturbation could be classified as a sin. However, you have to realize that is something so low on the totem pole that nobody really cares about. It's almost funny. It's the parking ticket. Like, it's a joke.
To say that it's a lesser sin really downplays the damage that rule, commandment that has done. Try sitting in front of a male bishop and talking about your sins of masturbating, your sexual experience with yourself in your room privately, and feeling guilty and feeling dirty and feeling shameful about your own sexuality.
Do you think a 40-year-old plumber bishop should be asking a 13-year-old girl alone in a closed door, one-on-one, where she touches herself, when she touches herself? Because people close to me in my life have been in the bishop's office alone with the bishop while the bishop is grilling them about where they touch themselves, when they touch themselves, and how they touch themselves. Is that a serious thing to you?
Okay, if what happened in this dark room, the nefarious man was saying, where hast thou touched
I'm telling you, it
thyself?
happened to someone very close to me. I'm telling you, it happened to someone very close to me.
Okay, first off, I would want to know more about the situation because I believe that's a mischaracterization that has been completely out of line with every single confessional experience I've ever had.
Two things. One only need read The Miracle of Forgiveness written by Spencer W. Kimball and the old manuals and approaches to homosexuality to know how the church characterized masturbation as deeply sinful. I also served as a bishop. I had everything from 12-year-olds to 80-year-olds coming into the office to talk to me and sharing that with me without any prompting from me. I'm like, hey, what can I do for you? Oh, Bishop, I'm here to confess. Well, what are you here to confess? I'm here to tell you that I masturbate. It obviously weighs on the members' minds in the middle of living in a world where modern science and health awareness says that that's a perfect part of everyone's growing up and a perfect part of somebody's sexuality. Cardin Ellis really is downplaying something and sort of showing himself to be being dishonest and deceptive in terms of trying to minimize it, knowing that this is being talked about in front of a major audience. I would just suggest that he and the church sort of have a lot of growth to do to put this one way behind us so that it's not even an issue, so that kids aren't coming in. Because I was a carpet salesman. I was 29 years old. I had no business sitting and talking to another human being, more or less a child, about their healthy sexual habits. The church can do better, and so can Cardin Ellis.
Well, thanks a lot for sharing. I know that I was asked about those type of invasive questions when I was 12 years old, and I honestly didn't know much about it. And the bishop was really kind of explaining it to me, and that was obviously very awkward. This is a very common sentiment within the church. So the basic sum ups for me from the Jubilee discussion, people want to criticize Cardinals and Kwaku and Timber and the others for making very cringeworthy remarks and being, in my opinion, somewhat duplicitous. But they're the only ones who are really willing to come out into these spaces. What we need is senior leaders of the church to engage in these type of environments. If they have better answers on all of these questions about whether masturbation is sinful, about whether women are equal in the church, or racism or anything else, they should come out into the playing field, but they won't do so. And it's because we've seen that cringeworthy interactions like this, or when Elder Holland in 2012 was interviewed by the BBC, or when President Oaks in 2019 was interviewed or took questions at the University of Virginia, the questions and answers that we get are very unsatisfying. Any last thoughts on this incredibly viral Jubilee exchange?
It does seem strange that in Mormonism, you have a prophet like Samuel the Lamanite who will stand on the wall at the expense of taking arrows shot at him. You'll have a Benadai go before the king and risk death to tell the truth. And yet the prophets, seers, and revelators of the modern day have no ability to step up front and to take the hard questions.
That's a very telling statement. If you want to get in touch with me, come on over to my website. I'm at www.mormonnewsroundup.org, or you can send me an email to Kolob at mormonnewsroundup.org. I'd be very grateful for that. A couple last articles to take us out, Bill, is a Mormon Stories apology, which has really gone viral here. And it's an apology from the Mormon Stories organization, who I know you've worked with very carefully here. And it's apologies to Charlie Bird, Ryan Clifford, and the Mormon LGBTQ community. Can you summarize what this apology is all about, and why do you feel that it was necessary, or maybe you don't think it was necessary? What do you think?
You have a very public persona, Charlie Bird, who has a YouTube channel. He's written books, and he stands up and publicly puts his ideas out into the universe through social media and says that I'm gay, I'm in a relationship, and I'm going to go ahead and be an active believing Mormon. And his ward allows him. He gets to take the sacrament. He gets to hold a calling. And what Mormon Stories did is they wanted to talk about it, because we are at a moment where folks like Jacob Hansen and Midnight Mormons and I forget what Greg Mattson, I think maybe is the gentleman's name, they're out there having conversations where they're expressing that there are a lot of people, themselves included, who are confused by the fact that the church has a theology and a set of teachings on the record that homosexuality is sin and that one cannot participate faithfully in the church when one is a practicing homosexual. And then what people are observing is that out in the church is beginning to allow folks to participate. Charlie Bird being one of them. Gerardo, another gay man, wants to cover the story. He goes to Charlie Bird's ward, observes him taking the sacrament, and then comes back to Mormon Stories, does an episode with John, and Gerardo shares like, hey, we saw him take the sacrament. He definitely has a calling. He's participating in the ward. And Charlie him and his partner seemed to be bothered by someone showing up to see if they were taking the sacrament. And then Equality Utah got involved, issued a statement against Mormon Stories for having spied on Charlie. I don't think an apology is necessary. My reason is, first off, my conversation and listening to the comments of gay Latter-day Saints or gay ex-Latter-day Saints, the majority of them seem to side with what Mormon Stories did. Number one. Number two is that most gay Mormons lack privilege and they are witch hunted in any ward where they try to show up and want to be a practicing homosexual. Charlie Bird is a public persona who is allowed to participate. That's a double standard, and the church certainly needs to step forward and sort of correct it. And rather than blame Equality Utah, rather than blame Mormon Stories, rather than blame Charlie Bird, we all ought to be pointing the finger at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who doesn't catch up with a modern view of science and epigenetics, recognizing that homosexuality is almost always not a choice, and that folks ought to have the same space as straight people in the church to participate faithfully.
Well, what's amazing to me, Bill, is that the church actually picked up on this apology statement. And I was kind of surprised to see that the church would weigh in on this. But after I thought about it, I thought for sure that the church would want to weigh in on this. And this is the statement from the Deseret News here. These editorials are not official, but they shine a light on what the church's basic mentality is. And it says that Equality Utah and other LGBTQ advocacy groups issued joint statement. And this is the amusing part for me, Bill. It says on controversial podcast, they wouldn't name Mormon Stories in the headline. Is that because they don't like the word Mormon, or why didn't the church name the podcast?
That article is so one-sided. Nobody there reached out to Mormon Stories for a comment. The way everything is worded in that story, you can just tell who they want to be the good guy and who they want to be the bad guy.
I have two other reactions here for the Mormon Stories apology, and one is from one of my favorite YouTubers, and it's from Julia, who on Analyzing Mormonism, who talks about her experience being a gay member of the church and whether she was allowed to take the sacrament, which is kind of the heart of the entire controversy is of Charlie Bird and Ryan taking the sacrament. And this is really heartfelt, and I really think it gets to the core of the entire issue.
I met with my bishop back in April of 2021, and I told him that I was leaving my marriage because I was gay. He told me to read Charlie Bird's book, Without the Mask. Charlie grew up in the same area as me, and I see his family all the time. I told my bishop that I had read his book. My bishop then proceeded to tell me to be like Charlie, to stay in the church, to stay single, and not to date women. I cut the bishop off mid-sentence, and I said, Bishop, I did read his book. And you know what I noticed? He never said he was going to stay single. And he never said he was going to stay celibate. He said he was going to carve his own path, even if it made him unpopular. My bishop just stared at me. And then he did something that still hurts me to this day. He took away my calling as the gospel doctrine teacher. He took away my temple recommend, and he told me I could no longer take the sacrament. I had done nothing except decide to leave my marriage. I was perfectly worthy to enter the temple, and yet because I was choosing to leave my marriage because I was gay, everything was taken away from me. We learned last week that Charlie Bird and his husband not only have callings, but they are also blessed with taking the sacrament. I'm not here to discuss the ethics of how this information was obtained, but there are two questions that I want to address. One, is Charlie Bird privileged in the church? And two, does making this information public, that Charlie and his husband have callings and take the sacrament, make a positive change? Number one, yes, of course Charlie is privileged, and that hurts. That is so painful. If the leaders of the church talk to God and are inspired, then why are so many people being treated differently? I am thrilled for Charlie Bird. We also learned that there are 6 other couples who are in legal same-sex marriages who also enjoy the privilege of taking the sacrament. I celebrate that. I also feel a deep sense of loss. Why are so many of us treated differently? I would that every queer Latter-day Saint had a bishop like Charlie's. Can you imagine? 2, does making this information public bring positive change? There is a clip from the Mormon Stories episode that I wanted to share because I feel like so many people are just brushing over it.
This morning I had this beautiful conversation with my dad, who, I mean, I've said a million times in the podcast that my dad's a bishop, but I was telling him about it, and I just wanted to hear his opinion on it as a bishop. And as the conversation started going through, and I was explaining who Charlie was and what was happening and how I saw what I saw. I went to church yesterday and saw it. He's like, you know, if Zach and you, my husband, if Zach and you decide to come to church and come to our word, I would let you have a calling, and I would give you a calling, and I would probably also let you take the sacrament. Like I wouldn't tell you not to. And I was like, wow. Like, so if this episode does that to other bishops, I mean, you know, that's great.
Gerardo's dad serves as a bishop in Mexico. Gerardo is an illegal same-sex marriage. I don't know exactly what was going through Bishop Simanu's head when his son told him this story. But it sounds to me like Bishop Simanu felt that because another bishop was carving their own way, so to speak, in allowing this righteous gay couple to take the sacrament, he could make that choice too. If one bishop changes his mind because he learns that another bishop is choosing better to give a gay couple the sacrament, then this news has done a tremendous amount of good. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that every ward has at least one person from the LGBTQ community. And as many of us know, queer Latter-day Saints are killing themselves because they have no place in the church. What is happening right now, from my perspective, is that queer Latter-day Saints are carving a space for themselves. But that's nearly impossible without bishops like Charlie's leading the way. And if these privileges are ever taken away from Charlie or these 6 other couples, that says more about the church than about anything else.
Bill, that's just incredibly heartfelt. And I really think it gets to the heart of the issue, which is talking about the double standard within the church of certain individuals who are allowed to participate fully and other individuals who are in similar circumstances who are not, and the pain and the heartache that causes.
First off, kudos to Julio. That is an amazing clip, number one. Number two is that Charlie Bird, the gay man in a homosexual relationship who does hold a calling and is taking the sacrament, he said it wouldn't matter if he moved, that situation would remain the same, that he would still be active. And somebody asked, how do you know that? And he said, well, because God blesses his children. But what I think that has to mean is that this isn't just a local bishop not doing what the church would want him to do. It sounds like what's really happening is that the church has given Charlie some sort of approval to be a sort of trial case of some sort, and to be able to participate at his ward, to the point where if he moved, he would still be allowed to participate. Now, the problem is that most gay Latter-day Saints don't have that luxury, and a lot of harm is done to them. And my 2 cents is that church has to be consistent. It can't give one person in one place, like Berkeley, certain privileges because they come from an affluential family or live in a wealthy ward. Instead, I think you have to make space in the church that if you're going to change, you got to stand up and you got to say it out loud. You can't do it secretly. You can't go through 20 years of silence and then suddenly say, no, gays were always allowed to be in our church. You have to stand up and say, we did it wrong in the past. We're sorry. And going forward, we're going to do it differently.
Bill, let me just give you one more reaction on this, and then we're going to let this one go. And this one is a little bit more critical of Mormon Stories' approach in this particular instance here. And it was tweeted out by Eli McKenzie, who is a member of the church, to my knowledge. He works for Curtin McConkie. He is openly gay. He writes a very popular column that often deals with queer issues on the Salt Lake Tribune. And he's retweeting here a tweet here by McKenzie, who also is a big-time TikTok person with over 10,000 followers. And she's agreed to come on the Mormon News Roundup soon, by the way. And let me read this to you and play this clip for you, which is a little bit more critical of Mormon Stories' approach here. It's McKenzie perfectly explains the latest Mormon Stories controversy. I try to stay out of their constant mess, but this one irked me in such a special way. I wish we could all ignore them in perpetuity.
What if Charlie and Ryan were not taking the sacrament? And how would that be any of your business? Because there's a number of reasons that bishops will not let you take the sacrament. And we know that. As ex-Mormons, we know that there's bishop roulette. We know that they're just making things up. The sacrament is such a personal thing to so many members. I had friends take it when they weren't supposed to take it at church. And there you have people like me who almost never took it because I never felt good enough. And so to watch whether someone decides to take the sacrament or not is crazy pants. It doesn't matter if Charlie's a public figure. He's a person. He's not a zoo animal that you can go and watch whenever you want. He did not invite you there. It doesn't matter that it's a public space. It doesn't matter that what you did wasn't illegal. It's weird. It's invasive. They've straight up lied on Charlie and Ryan's name and have made them out to be these villains in the gay community while simultaneously saying, no, we love them. We're celebrating them. If you're celebrating them, why didn't you go up to them after sacrament meeting and tell them congratulations? It's because you don't know them. It's because it's weird that you were there and you didn't want them to know you were there. Gerardo being gay does not absolve him of his actions. There are lots of gay advocates within and out of the Mormon church that are not okay with this. It's not just me. Let's stop using really, really bad apologetics to justify stalking someone. Anyways, happy Sunday. Please don't go to sacrament meetings to watch people take the sacrament. It's weird.
So first off, kudos to that content creator, McKenzie, for being able to put makeup on and give a coherent thought. I can't do that. I can't do two things at once, like pat my head and scratch my belly or vice versa. But to what she said, first off, Charlie Bird is a well-known public person. He has written a book called Without the Mask. What is the idea with that title? It's that you're a gay person who's going to just come forward, take some risk and go, look, I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm going to be gay. I'm going to participate in my ward. I'm going to be an active believing Mormon. If this was a private person who kept their life to themselves and Mormon Stories sent somebody to spy on them, I would be taking the exact opposite opinion here. What I think makes the difference is that Charlie has told the world I'm gay. He's told the world I'm active in the church. He's told the world I have a calling. He's told the world I get to participate here. When you're a public persona and you put your voice out there, people get to challenge that. And the only way that people can point out the double standard here is by ensuring that they don't speak falsely, going to a public worship service where other people in that room are watching who takes the sacrament and who doesn't. It's not like that's a secret activity in the church. As a bishop, you're constantly watching who takes it and who doesn't. And you're the one who's often telling people they can take it or not take it. I think the situation is very different because of who it involves and the notoriety they have and the attempt that they've made to put themselves out there as a public voice for saying, I can be gay and I can make it work. And Mormon Stories is simply challenging that assumption.
What I would just say, one last thing to wrap this one up, is I thought the apology was timely. I thought it was good. I thought it was heartfelt, and I thought it was appropriate. And I thought that the apologetics, if you want to call them, we already covered that, statements that the Mormon Stories put out were also good. I just wanted to see the apology done first, and then we could get to the apologetics afterwards. That would be my only critique of the situation.
Yeah, I think Mormon Stories addressing it was great. I was a little bothered by Troy Williams and Equality Utah's response. I also am bothered by the fact that Equality Utah and Troy Williams don't seem to say a whole lot out loud to the church. I'm assuming they're working behind closed doors with them to try to bring about change. But then you also then need to offer that same sort of standard to Mormon Stories and not try to discipline them or to try to critique them out in public as well. If the church has done the greater harm, then you ought to treat the other entity to at least the same standard.
Now that does take us to our final two segments, which is what are you working on these days and how can people get in touch with you? I know that you've run the Latter Dazed and Confused, the Mormon newscast, and you've been doing that now for a couple of months. How's that been going? You're entered the contemporary LDS news culture. How's it been going for you? And what projects are you working on?
Yeah, so every week, myself, Radio Free Mormon, Rebecca Biblioteca, and John DeLynn get together to kind of go over the news stories. We're a little different than you. I think you hit a lot of things really sharply, by the way. This is a great program. We tend to take just one story per person and sort of delve into it kind of at a more of a depth, but don't cover as much. Really enjoying it. It's on Mondays at 6 p.m., the Mormon newscast. We're really having a good time with it. Other things we're working on, we just put out some conversations on the Sidney Rigdon Solomon Spalding theory on Mormonism Live. We're getting ready to have, I think, an episode in the next couple of weeks where Dan Vogel and Bryce Blankennagel come on, and they'll take opposite sides of that theory and sort of share with the audience what their insights were as they heard us cover it, adding strength or weakness to the argument on each side. Mormonism Live is, every Wednesday at 6:20 p.m., where Radio Free Mormon and myself are the host, with Maven running the show in the background, and does a great job with that as well. RFM is doing the Mormon Sunday School. He also does a Shakespeare podcast that he just started. That man has so many things inside his head, and I'm just really glad that he's finding outlets to share them.
That sounds fantastic. I'm a big fan of all of your work, Bill. And that does take us to our final segment, which is the Mormon News Roundup Joke of the Week. And I believe you have that for us, right?
Yeah, it's not really so much of a joke as an observation. I was watching something on my TV the other night. I'm going through the various streaming channels, Netflix and Hulu and Peacock and all of those. And I came across the movie The Vow. And if people don't know what The Vow is, I can't remember what the actress's name is, but she gets in an accident and she's in a coma. She wakes up from the coma, and Channing Tatum is her husband, but she is standoffish because she doesn't remember him. She suffered from amnesia. And it just strikes me, if any female, and to be honest, I'm as heterosexual as they come, if I woke up and they told me that my husband is Channing Tatum, I think I'm going along because that guy is hot.
Hey,
so
where do I sign up for that again? That's,
right. There's not a woman on this planet who wakes up from a coma with amnesia who's told Channing Tatum is their husband and pushes him away. Every woman's like, whoa, I just hit the lottery. And like I said, about half the heterosexual men would feel that way too.
Just tell me where I need to sign up. That's not a problem for me. Now that
Channing Tatum.
Yeah, why not? And that does remind me, Bill, we release new episodes of the Mormon News Roundup every Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you come on over to the live chat at that time on YouTube, you can interact with your humble host here. And we also release new episodes of the Mormon movie reviews every Monday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our latest episode of the Mormon movie reviews, we're going to review Joseph Smith, The Man, starring the famed Mormon actress Lethe Taji. And this is produced by the Visual Transit Authority under the direction of Tom Christensen. It is not an official church video, but is in a church affiliated video that was often released onto a family home evening supplements and other church produced materials. This is where we get the legendary story, shaking the hand of the man who shook the hand of Joseph Smith. And we do have some good time reviewing this film where we provide insightful and occasionally irreverent commentary. And, the Mormon movie reviews, it's kind of going global here. As a matter of fact, we had Jana Reese on the program here this last week, who writes the popular column on the religion news service and called Flunking Sainthood. And she featured your humble host here, Bill Devays from the Mormon News Roundup, revisiting those old Mormon movies from 50 years ago with live commentary, where I've reviewed Summer of Decision and a number of other church films. If we're going to link to that in the show notes, including Saturday's Warrior and a couple of other ones. Do you like these old Mormon movies like Legacy, Bill?
I put out a YouTube short where I played that clip. I shook the hand that shook the hand that shook the hand of the prophet Joseph Smith. And I was like, whoa, Jenny, go wash your hands. Like, you've touched the hand that touched the hand of the prophet Joseph Smith. In terms of what he did with young girls, all of that stuff with polygamy, you probably ought to wash your hands twice.
I actually joked in the review that I shook the hand of the person who shook the hand of the polygamous wife of Joseph Smith. And that's almost as good as shaking Joseph Smith's hand himself. Absolutely. Now, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Mormon News Roundup. And I want to give a shout out to Weird Alma on bandcamp.com. And thanks for ruminating with me on what I call the great and spacious beehive. And remember,
no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.